Hi.
Hey Dan, how you doing?
Hi.
Brian asked me to come to this meeting. I don't know if he remembers asking me, but but he did.
Hello, and good morning from Northern Virginia.
Hey, David, how you doing?
Good afternoon from London.
Excellent.
I don't know about you, David, but we actually have snow coming down. I know you can't see it, but
No snow here. Cool day, but
they threatened it in Tennessee, so they closed the schools and everything, but no snow as yet.
I see my kids aren't getting snow days anymore. They just work from home. So there are no more snow days. A tragedy to tragedy.
hey, David, does Brian usually come to these?
Not to the best practices working group.
Okay.
But,
Well, let me just explain why I'm here, and then you can, depending upon your schedule, you can fit me in or not.
I'm not running this. Crobe's
you're not?
running this. Talk to Crobe.
Okay. Well,
Crobe, you're here.
so Crow, here's the deal. I was talking to Brian. I'm a research guy for Linux Foundation, and did work last year for OpenSSF on security issues, and managed to go out and get 72 completes of my survey to maintainers, from maintainers rather, and on 53 different best practices. And so I was talking to Brian about a week ago about what his plans are for research this year, and he said, well, why don't you stop by one of these best practices meetings and kind of show them what you've got so far and ask questions. You get them to kind of comment on how we might leverage this or what a good path forward would be. So if you have time today, I'm ready to do that, and can talk about it whenever you want to fit me in.
Okay. Can everyone hear me?
Yep.
All right. I installed some new equipment, and my audio is a little flaky. So let's add Stephen a little bit further down the agenda.
I proposed him on the last bullet of the
Awesome.
agenda.
Thank you, David. So we'll get to you in a little bit. We have a couple other little updates we want to talk through first. George, you have your hand raised, sir.
Yes, I do. I proposed the other day to add the C++ my brain.
The guide, the document.
Exactly, the guide. Oh, words. Sorry, I wanted to. Yes, I proposed to put this on the agenda because one of my colleagues, Thomas, who's on the call, could and would like to quickly maybe present, let's say, or is interested in contributing, let's say, first, and then he has some material that could be the foundation or could be used as a foundation to extend the current draft that exists already.
Great.
So that's another topic that would be great to have on the agenda for today.
I see it there. So let us get started, everyone. Welcome to the last day of the first month of 2023. 11 more to go before 2024, everybody. Do we have any new friends that wanted to introduce themselves and say hello to the group as we get started?
Yeah, I'll chime in. Hi, everyone. Bradford Bartlett here. I work at Sonos, the speaker company, and I work in, I see somebody clapping, hopefully a happy customer. I work on product security, so I've been interested in OpenSSF and getting to learn more about that, and Salsa and some of the other frameworks and tools out there that might help us on our journey here. So nice to meet everyone.
Excellent. Welcome, Bradford. Any other new friends that wanted to say hello?
Sure, I'll jump in. Hi, I'm Sheila Saibi, and I am located in Silver Spring, Maryland. I work at Comcast in the open source program office, and I am here to lurk a little bit and learn how to get involved in this community so that I can help our technologists also get involved in this community.
Excellent. Welcome, Sheila.
Thank you.
Any other new friends?
Hi, my name is Caroline Cameron. I work in supply chain security with IBM. So I am a DevSecOps developer. So I'm very interested in encouraging more widespread adoption of secure development. So I'm happy to be here and help in any way I can.
Excellent. Well, welcome, Caroline.
Thank you.
Anyone else new that wants to say hello?
Yes, hello, I'm Thomas Newman. So I'm from Ericsson, where I work in the product security organization as part of a security technologies team. So I'm joining today to present this material on C and C++ hardening that Georg mentioned. Nice to meet everyone.
Nice to meet you. Did we get everybody?
Maybe, or maybe not. I'll introduce myself. My name is Robert. I come from Norway, and I work in a company called Mesto42, and we're a platform engineering / security / everything as code company. We're making platforms to create platforms. So we need a little bit of those of security there. So I'm just here to try to help out as much as possible. And I have a long CV. I'm not going to go into it. I'll just skip for that. So feel free to reach out if there's anything. All right.
Well, welcome. We're glad to have everybody here. Did we get everybody? Everyone get a chance to introduce themselves and say hello before we move on? All right. Could I please ask someone to be our scribe for today to help us take notes?
I will type, and I invite others to do the same.
Thank you, Mr. Wheeler. Always appreciated. All right. If we have any additional opens, let's add those down in the open section. A couple brief notes. I wanted to remind everybody that the call for papers for the Open Source Summit North America, which will be in beautiful Vancouver, British Columbia later this year, that call for papers closes Sunday. So if you are interested in submitting a talk, please do so by Sunday. If anyone is interested in assistance in helping massage their abstract, or they're looking for co-presenters, please raise your hand, let us know. We're glad to help out. Several members of the group have already submitted some things, so we're always welcome to see some strong representation from the OpenSSF at this summit. Any questions there? And there will be, I imagine the call for papers for the European version of the summit will open up probably in another month or two. Do you have any idea where that might be this year, David?
I don't.
I had heard rumors of maybe Amsterdam, but we'll see.
No, that's KubeCon Europe. Open Source Summit, you asked, right? That's in Spain, Bilbao, I think.
Oh,
yeah.
Well, that'll be something fun to look forward to later this year. Excellent. So let us go through. We have several sub-projects that put notes. Is anyone here interested in speaking to any of the notes that's important to share with the team?
All right. Notes and we can read them.
Absolutely. That's why we asked everyone to enter ahead of time. If there's anything important, please put that out. We started a source code management best practices guide. We met last week, and we will continue meetings every other week, continuing next week. If anyone's curious what we talked about and what we're up to, there's issue 102 in our repo. We have created a folder for the Docker repository, and we're already starting to check in some materials. So that'll be kind of our next group project, will be a source code management best practices guide. Pretty exciting. So if you're interested, either kind of monitor that issue or that folder, or join us on the call. That'd be super awesome. Any questions about the SCM guide?
One minor thing, and maybe this is just me, but source code management's a really broad topic. It seems to me you're really talking about configuration guides for forges like GitHub and GitLab, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So I'm wondering if you might want to title it to be more specific, because there are people who use Git locally. People use completely different kinds of tools and systems. It might be useful to title it.
That's an excellent suggestion, David. I would welcome that comment on the issue. Initially, it was titled GitHub Best Practices.
Right.
So we're kind of directionally correcting things, so we're not endorsing any single vendor. But yeah, I think that's good feedback. So why don't you post a comment and we'll get the group to potentially course correct again. All right. Our first topic is, as was mentioned, is our C and C++ compiler options project. That's another document we've been kind of percolating. So I will yield the floor to Thomas. I believe you wanted to talk about this, please.
Yes, thank you very much. Is it all right if I share my screen? So I'd like to show
absolutely
like the material that we have.
Absolutely. There's a green button on the bottom of the Zoom window.
Yeah, let's see. So I hope, let's see, I seem to have like a permission issue. Let's see if this will. My apologies. It seems that
no worries.
Zoom doesn't have the permissions to share the.
Did it give you a pop-up?
Yeah, let me see if I can get this unblocked. I think I unfortunately might have to drop out and rejoin for this to work. Is it all right if we take this a little bit later? And
absolutely.
I will try to sort it out on my day. My apologies.
No worries at all. Go ahead and get your Zoom recycled, and we'll address you after we'll move on to Stephen. Stephen wanted to talk about some things from LF research.
Yeah, this is best practices research. So I'm going to try to share my screen too. We'll see how this works. All right. I'm going to leave the panel up on the side because it may be useful to jump around a bit. So what you need to know to begin with is that at Brian Bellendorf's request last year, since the LF has only recently, back in the middle of 2021, started up a research group that I'm part of. My first opportunity to work with Brian was in the middle of 2022, actually beginning of 2022. And so we put together a survey on open source software supply chain security issues. And as part of that particular survey, we went out and tried to talk to maintainers / core contributors. Our sample for the survey was, we had a lot of people start the survey, but we had about between 400 and 500 who actually completed most of the questions. But we did have 72 that self-identified as a maintainer or core contributor who went through and answered a specific section designed only for maintainers and core contributors. And that was the section on best practices. What I did was I spent time with David Wheeler, went through all of his secure software development best practices, and looked at the salsa framework and others that are similar to that, and went through and tried to winnow down, out of David's 100 plus, I think it is, best practices, a subset that I could actually put in the survey and ask questions about. And so I ended up with 53 of David's best practices. And I managed to torture the maintainers pretty well because there was a space for feedback at the end of the survey, which I think ran for them about 80 questions in total. And then some said, fabulous, I love the fact that you're actually, somebody is looking at this particular space. Others said way too long. And I think probably all of those statements, hold true realistically. So anyway,
just real quick comment. It's not mine. I mean, the best.
Oh, it's not yours anymore.
Badge. I mean, well, no. It's never been mine. I mean, the
okay.
best practices it's
right.
a whole project. There are many people. I lead the project, but it is not just me.
Okay. Well, I still want to thank David for helping me kind of navigate those the complex waters of those best practices. So anyway, what I want to do is I don't want to show you all of the data because there's not time for that, and there's really not a need for that. This was a summary of the best practices that I asked about. So there were 7 different areas or different topics. And on the left side, you see the number of questions we had about each best practice that I aligned with that particular topical area.
Yeah, Steve,
so,
can I interrupt real quick again?
Yeah, sure.
Do you have a URL for this? Because I want to make sure this is.
I can create one. I don't have one right now.
Okay, please. Yes, thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay, so here's an example. For instance, this was best basic activities, and there were 9 questions here. These best practices that are identified on the left side of the text, those I did my best to shorten the description as much as I could, but only enough to be able to fit, onto the page. But I tried to make sure. I mean, I was an industry analyst for 30 years, and so I understand application development pretty well from an analyst focus. And so I made sure that the descriptions here had enough information to tell the maintainer what it was that I wanted to ask about. And as you can see on the right side, where the bars are, the horizontal bars are, I asked them to, for each best practice, are they using that best practice now? If they're not using it, are they planning to use it later in 2022? Because we did the survey back in Q2 of 2022. So it is getting a little bit long in the tooth when I have to take responsibility for that. But nevertheless, we asked, are they going to implement this best practice later in 2022 or sometime in 2023? I didn't have enough room to say beyond 2023, but then I skipped then to, do you have no plans to use this best practice? Does it not apply to the particular way in which you are doing maintenance? Or do you not know or are not sure about either how to answer the questions or kind of what the state is of this particular best practice as it applies to your use? So those were the, 5 different types of responses. They had to pick one. And this was repeated for all 53 of these best practices. So these are the ones on basic activities. I've got 2 pages here. There were a total of, I think, 9 on source code management and change control. And you can see that in general, there's a pattern that becomes clear very quickly as to how many, a lot of best practice use is happening. If it's not happening, there is some planned. And the not applicable is pretty small. The no plans to use varies significantly. And what I need to ultimately do is follow up with some maintainers to try to find, why is it that people would have no plans to use some of these? Not sure. Maybe it has to do with the ones I selected from the secure software development best list. Who knows? So there's a panel here on software builds. Sorry about that. Software quality, testing, And then we had, I guess, several on security from slightly different foci. This is sort of overall security focused best practices. This is specific to testing. And then we had secure software development. So what I'm here to do actually is to ask you about any ideas you might have for how I might leverage this data. So here's, one of the obvious ways from a reporting standpoint would be able to show the data much like you just saw it, talk about the percentages that are using it now and the plans for future use and what the growth is looking like. Perhaps have a story that I have to obviously develop on, why some people have no plans to use. So that's the obvious way to report on this. And I think one of the things I would need to do to report on this and probably add some value is to be able to look at the different topics, the best practices within those topics, and gain a better understanding for, how difficult maybe is it to actually implement this kind of a best practice, and what is the value proposition that goes along with it, so that there's a story that tell for those best practices that don't have a lot of people using them, maintainers using them right now. I mean, as you saw for the basic activities, those are kind of like the entry point for doing secure software development. So they were, widely subscribed to. But for some of the later ones, when it came to security, for instance, like this, the last one on the list, dynamic application security testing, so DAST, and web app scanning, surprisingly, not a lot of use right now. Kind of surprising, and then no plans to use. I think there's a lot of developers who probably do things in a very manual way and with a lot of introspection into the code, and may not necessarily either feel that the tools are needed or tools don't accomplish quite what they're looking for. I'm not sure. I'm just speculating at this point. Anyway, but as you can see, there's a lot to think about and talk about here. So before I stop and sort of see what people might have to offer and what people think, let me just talk about one possible way to leverage this information I thought was potentially useful. So, we do have 72 maintainers that answered every single one of these questions. Now, it's not a lot of data, but it is enough data to be able to see an emergent patterns in the data. And we're not going to try to segment it because we don't have enough to do that. But one of the things I wanted to mention here was this thing called predecessor analysis. It would be really interesting if we could understand, or I could understand better, for a particular best practice, do you have to complete other best practices before you can then move on to this next best practice? So are there prerequisites that exist, and where do they exist? And do they commonly exist across the set of best practices that we have here? Because if there was sort of a network model that I could put together, which said, this best practice has to be completed before you can move on and do these other best practices, then one thing we could do is we could, based on this model of prerequisites, we could then create a web app, and we could have somebody come into the web app and tell us all about what best practices they're using. And then based on that, and based on the predecessor map that we have, and most likely information, as I say, show at the bottom of the screen here, what's the difficulty in implementing a best practice and what kind of value do you get out of a best practice? We could actually build something akin to a recommendation engine that would say, here are some of the things that come to mind based on your particular set of best practices and use, the challenges and the benefits that exist from doing, all of these best practices. And that would have to be probably qualitative information. But nevertheless, then we could build recommendations about here's where you might want to look next from the standpoint of improving your secure software development, and getting sort of biggest bang for the buck potentially, or other potential scenarios depending upon what's of interest to them, or different ways that we can recommend to help them improve what they're doing, depending upon perhaps what topical areas are most important to them, for instance. So anyway, that was one idea that came up with. And of course, if they share data with us, then we can push that information into the actual model itself from the standpoint of usage, what we're seeing out there in the industry. And so the model can continually be updating based on people that essentially take the survey and are looking for results back. And we can continue to update, and become better informed over time as we try to report back results to people. So I'm going to stop there and see whether or not, there are anybody out there has some either other ideas for what I can do, or some sort of assessment on the, is this idea crazy? Is it not rigorous enough from the standpoint of the approach that I've outlined, or anything else with respect to this kind of information that you want to share with me?
I've got a couple questions in the chat for you. We can start there, and then others, please raise your hand as we have additional feedback or questions for Stephen.
I'm sharing here so I can see the chat.
Michelle asked, do you have any idea what industries were represented as part of your survey?
I do. In fact, I do have that. I haven't put it together for just the 72 maintainers, but yes, we have demographics that are part of every survey. So we know what industry they're coming from. We know a fair amount about their level of experience. And so, yes, the answer is yes, we do.
There were several requests for sharing the slides.
I can do that. If I do share the slides, the one request I would make was, you have them for your internal use only. I need to be reporting on this and put a report together on this subject and get it out for the use inside of posting on the OpenSSF. So I don't want to have this stuff leak out publicly before I have a chance to be able to explain it with the right context, because I don't want this to end up being used in ways that could potentially reflect in odd ways on what's going on.
Yeah, absolutely. And do you have like a target of when you might be thinking the report will be ready?
Yeah. Well, I'm
rough.
I'm being very sheepish about this because I told Brian back last fall I had this in mind and I wanted to do it, and I thought I'd have it done before the end of the year. So let's see, we're getting some additional resources to help with the development of this, which is really cool. I would think probably about 3 to 4 months from now it'll surface. It takes about a month in production, and and it's going to have to go through a pretty a serious review process where we build a storyboard, we get that reviewed, we build a draft, we get that reviewed. So it's going to those review cycles take a while. So I would say, when we say safely, 4 months from now.
Okay, fair. Michelle. You may be on mute or double muted, which is always fun. While Michelle gets off of mute, did we have any additional thoughts or questions? I have a couple, but I'll yield to the group first. Everyone's very curious today.
One of the things I can say while people are trying to unmute is there's a lot of commentary here on SAST, DAST, and IAST. I don't have any dogs in this hunt, but the reality is that all of these are really, really useful tools. Both static analysis and dynamic analysis, and the integrated, which is, I think, really the combination of the two. So I'm a big fan of using tools to help address security issues. And one thing I do want to look closely at, as you can tell, is the fact that this is not the first survey where in some cases we've seen tool use not as strong as we want. In the actual the rest of the survey that already has been published for OpenSSF, and I really strongly recommend you go to the LF website and pull it down. I mean, all of this research is free. There is, I think tools were, either the number one or number two way in which significant improvements could be made to, software, from addressing a software security need. That and best practices both shown through as being very important activities that developers should take. So, it's the typical software tools. It's the fuzz testing, and it's also software composition analysis, where you can look at licensing and vulnerability issues. And there's a whole raft of tools. And the platforms for creating platforms, there's tooling there that's really fascinating as a way to potentially build more bulletproof platforms, essentially. There's a lot of different ways to do this. I'm a big fan of tools, but I will have to look closely at what the data is saying here in terms of tool uptake, because I have seen in other questions approaches where maintainers are more apt to say, look, I do a lot of manual inspection of the code, and that is, sort of the best way in which I know to go through and, either check work or be able to, validate that the work has been done well.
So can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Yes, we can.
Yeah, I'm not sure why it didn't work before. So what is your maturity criteria? Do you have that detailed list?
When you say, what do you mean?
The criteria that you say, yeah, I mean, you're mentioning best practices, but is there a detailed maturity criteria for how you scored this and your scoring methodology?
I haven't done any scoring at all so far. I'm just sort of picking obvious places where we might want to start, which is, challenges and benefits. But I don't have any.
Yeah. Okay. So I think I'm just going to be direct, if that's okay.
Yeah.
And let me turn on my camera, because that's probably not, if I'm going to talk. I think that before, when you do, when you do a case study or a review like this, I think it's important to confirm what the criteria is ahead of time, because then it's less fuzzy. I think we don't know what we're talking about. I think that's really critical for me when I review studies. And I would like to make sure, because when you talk best practices, that can mean many different things. So either whether you use the NIST framework or OWASP or CMMI or whatever, right? I think that needs to be confirmed, and then it needs to be agreed upon and published in advance. I would like to see industry representation, even though it's small. I'd also like to see a larger sample size. I think 72 is really small for me. And I think that I would break down the security testing into agreed upon domains. Like I saw you left IAST out, and sure, there's overlap between DAST and IAST, but I mean, people are still trying to adopt it, right? And it'd be helpful to see where they are with that. I think those are my main points with it. Is that helpful? How did this land for you?
It's fine. It's fine. Yeah, I wish the sample size were larger too. I guess the real question becomes, is the sample size sufficient to be able to draw some conclusions?
I think it's a good start. I applaud you for getting into it and starting to create something like that. I think from my perspective, I'd like to see in the hundreds of a sample size. to be more authoritative, if that.
Sure.
Okay.
Well, yeah. Clearly, when with small samples, you've got a big error margin on this, and so that works against you from the standpoint of drawing any conclusions. The challenge that I had in doing this was that I caught a lot of flack inside of Linux Foundation because Linux, the sort of the philosophy is don't bother the maintainers; they have a hard enough role as it is. And so it's very difficult.
Really?
Yeah, it's very difficult to get.
Okay, it's a study. Studies usually help people. Maybe you can get the certification for working with human volunteers. Have you heard of that PHRP or whatever? Maybe that would make people feel better. I don't know, but because I don't even, it's not even clear to me. Like one of the things that additionally isn't clear that just popped in my head. I don't know the sizes. Like it's not broken down by here's under 50, 50 to 500. That kind of information helps too, because then you can contextualize. A smaller org, they don't need to. Maybe they can do some manual things because they've got maybe 5 developers or 10 developers, right?
Yeah, I have work size that they're a part of. So yeah.
Okay. So just, I'm hoping this is helpful, and I'm happy to talk to you offline if you want to, if it helps to get this feedback. I mean, because at Google we do the DORA stuff, and maybe we can use. I'm not saying we should do it like that, and I'm not trying to boss you or sass you, but I'm just saying that there's some methodologies that maybe might be useful. Just thought I'd throw it out there.
Yeah, I mean, at this point, I agree with you. The sample size is pretty thin. My question is whether or not I've got enough to actually add some value in some capacity. And if there are, and primarily what I was thinking was that based on usage patterns and the nature of the activities that were described, is there less usage in some areas simply because these are difficult best practices to implement? Or, is there, what insights can we draw, if any, from what we already know? And I think that was probably pretty much as far as I thought we could go. I like the idea of a recommendation engine, but I'm not so sure that we have enough information to be able to make.
No, I would agree with that. And I wonder if you could, it's possible for you to take this initial exploration and call it that. Like you could call it, we performed an initial exploration. We'd like to dive into this further, but we will need the following assistance. That might be an opportunity. I think if you couch it that way, as opposed to not good enough or something like that, right?
Yeah, okay, that's good. A great idea. Thanks.
Yeah, because I think there are interesting questions, but the numbers, I agree with Michelle, the samples compared to the millions of developers, 72 is a little rough to make a lot of.
Well, remember, these are not your average developer. These are people that self-identify as a maintainer or core contributor, which is a pretty rarefied space.
Fair enough.
So I have a couple things, and then again, as anyone else has additional thoughts, please raise your hand to queue up. I think this is very interesting. I think we all agree that the sample size is an opportunity for future improvement, but I think the data is interesting. So if you are looking for additional, more collaborative feedback, don't hesitate. I would be very glad to work with you and David and anyone else in this team that's interested in kind of diving a little bit more into that information. And then secondly, we also lead, we have a SIG around education. And I think just spotting a couple things, despite the small sample size, we know that multi-factor authentication is a point of contention in the community. So that potentially could be something interesting we feed over to the education SIG. How can we provide more information to explain the benefits of multi-factor? The same thing with tooling. And as we do dive more deeply into what you already have. And as we get more participants, maybe there's some trends or recommendations we can make around open source tooling that might help. Maybe developers are unaware that there are open source options, or even, low cost commercial options in this space. So I'm really excited. I think there's a lot of opportunity to feed this into some of our other initiatives. So please, let's set something up to continue to collaborate.
Yeah, that's great. What I'll do is last statement here, which is I will stay on the meeting and I'll put into the chat what the URL is for the deck.
Great.
We have it before the end of the call.
Yeah, and as we mentioned, please, for internal use only, no sharing, please. We want to wait. Don't want to steal the thunder once the report gets out in roughly a quarter.
Okay, procedural question. I want to put this in the meeting notes. Is that a bad idea?
I don't think so.
Okay.
All right, any additional questions or feedback for Stephen before we hopefully move back to Thomas?
Okay, thanks, everyone.
Yeah, thank you, Stephen. This is excellent. I think it's a great start. Very excited about it. And it is a very unique opportunity to actually talk to people identifying as core maintainers and developers. We don't get that chance terribly often.
Yeah, great.
All right, Thomas, have you reset and are you ready to try to talk about C and C++?
Yeah, let's give this another try. So
excellent. There you go.
I hope
Yay.
my Firefox window is visible now to everyone.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, excellent. Thank you very much for the opportunity to come here and talk about this. So I'll try to be brief, but I'll maybe sort of say as much for the background on this is that this is sort of a document on what we call toolchain hardening for C and C++. That started out as a kind of like initially like an internal PowerPoint we would present to our product development units. And later it got turned into this sort of a part of our internal security recommendations. And sort of the motivation for this work was that we got this feedback from developers that they know that they need to apply these mechanisms such as stack protectors and things of that nature to C and C++ code, but actually getting to the situation where they had a grasp of how exactly this work and what threats they protect against, there was sort of like this gap. And one of the reasons for this was that while these options are widely available in compilers, sometimes the documentation was not necessarily that accessible to your average developer, right? So you needed to have someone with some security background to understand what was going on. So we sort of tried to address this gap by starting to collecting this material on toolchain hardening. I know that this is also something that you hear a lot of different terms for this, right? So binary hardening, runtime protection. We sort of picked this name because this is the name that OWASP uses, as well as it sort of goes nicely together with product hardening, which is, internally what we used to call like hardening the configuration. So this sort of goes nicely hand in hand, right? And this is sort of now a version of the document I've been turning to Markdown to make it a little bit online friendly. This is still work in progress, so excuse the rough edges. But sort of, if I sort of go briefly through like the content, so we have some sort of motivating text. We have a section on recommended compiler options, which is kind of like the meat of the document. So we sort of make this distinction between like compile time checks as well as then actual runtime protection mechanisms. One of the things feedback we also got was that if you are working on not necessarily always the latest compiler, it would be nice to know which compiler version actually supports this, as well as the options that are supported both by GCC and CLang compilers. And something that I'll sort of should address like ahead of time that this is not in any way sort of complete, right? So we have sort of prioritized covering the kind of options that are supported both by GCC and CLang, and as well as are cross-platform, right? So one of the things that we hope to do, possibly with the help of the community, if this is something that you would be willing to sort of adopt, would be to also extend this to platform-specific options. So for the support for things like Intel CET or ARM pointer authentication. So currently this is sort of limited to the stuff that is sort of a little bit more easier to deploy in the sense of that it's a software specific. But so we have like these tables, and then for each of these options, we have a sort of like a short section that tries to provide like a synopsis of what is happening. That's the extent for the warning flags. And then when we go to the actual runtime protection, we provide a little bit more information. So some of the like commonly asked questions is that what are the performance implications, right? This is what developers care about, right? Always, what's the impact on performance? And sort of we've taken the stance that you know, we try to explain that if there is a performance impact, where does that performance impact come from? Because obviously, you know, the actual effects will vary depending on what kind of software you apply it to, but we have sort of try to do our best to somehow characterize that. Are there like any corner cases that might hurt you very badly in performance? You should be aware of them, and just this notion that what are the sort of aspects of this feature that will actually contribute to performance overhead. And then we have a sort of like a general warning section, like when not to use. So some of these options can be you know, problematic, so you cannot come with a sort of general recommendation like always use it. So we try to cover possible corner cases which might be problematic, and we've sort of original format for this. So this sort of comes from like a Word document where each of these should sort of feature on a single page to be like accessible. That doesn't necessarily come across here from the like the markdown format, but sort of you see that we have sort of tried to be fairly brief on these so that it would be easy to sort of get at a glance an idea of what this feature does without having to, you know, spend potentially hours going through compiler documentation, go read a mailing list or a blog post. And so we've kind of like done all that effort and try to condense the sort of this into something that's accessible. Yeah, so basically this sort of mostly follow the same structure. We have started work on something that sort of discourage compiler options, so options that can have a security impact sometime. And then we have a work in progress section on sanitizers as well. So obviously there are more sanitizers than this, but again, these are the ones that are, I think, the common ones that at least our developers usually want to use. And then lastly, there is a section on handling debug information. So this is another sort of pain point that we felt was sort of necessary to address, that how do you actually you know, deploy binaries that are stripped, but then if you run into issues, you still need to be able to debug them. Yeah, so this is sort of what we have, and as part of this process, you know, we identified this you know, interest to open source these, and we thought that bringing it to OpenSSF would be a natural option, especially now that Ericsson has formally joined. And I know that there is a kind of like a partial overlap with the excellent work that Mr. Wheeler has been doing, but sort of again, we sort of try to do like a little bit of a deeper delve in on partially these options, and we are of course very happy to continue developing this, you know, and our hope is that we can do that through a community effort, because we also see a benefit in this getting like more pairs of eyes on this. So I think that's sort of the brief sort of summary from my side, and I think I'll sort of scroll through this document so you kind of see the extent of it. Are there any questions that I could answer you folks at this point?
I mean, I'm looking at this for the first time, but this looks awesome.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, so we, those of you who don't know, we do have an incubating project which has CC++ options, which it looks to me like this is fundamentally the same scope, but you've got a lot of information we don't have. I put in the notes the link to our current draft, the CC++ compiler options guide. But this has lots of information that we don't. I love the note of which compiler version when. I know that some folks have also asked to add, and this will be an interesting discussion point, the Windows compiler, because it uses completely different options. Yet we've got a lot of folks using that. But I don't
Yeah,
think
that's an
about
excellent
that.
point. So that's also something that's been brought up internally, and not just the Windows compiler, but other, let's say, proprietary compilers. So that's something that we've sort of currently limited ourselves to GCC and CLang, because as you can imagine, like actually going to find this information is quite time consuming. So
Right.
yeah.
I mean, as a larger group, we can say we add it, or we just limit the scope. I mean, that's another possibility too. I did find at least one document that did actually do a separate one for the Windows ones, but because the options are all so different, it's almost a different document at that point.
That's true.
I mean, I don't know if you've looked at how many people here have looked at the draft, but I mean, we've got just like 2 pages. It has some discussion. I think just like you, other folks have noted the same problem of just saying, "Hey, here's an option" is enough. Please, you need to explain why one would care. I would love to see this and a merge in of some of the other materials that we've got into some sort of, basically large version of, here are the flags you recommend and why. You've got a lot of details, so what I would suggest is brief summary at the top and then hyperlink down to all the details, so that people can, if all you want to know is what do I do, there it is. If you want to know the details, you can quickly find it, but you don't have to read it if you don't care.
Yeah, exactly. And basically provide like this ability to gain like a brief overview, but then delve a little bit deeper for those who actually are then considering and deploying this, and have the common gotchas that they might care about visible there, all in one place.
For those who don't know, documents in general are CC BY, our Creative Commons BY license, which means that even if you contribute, I mean, you can obviously keep using whatever, doing whatever you do, and then we can all work together to make, to add maybe missing information or whatever as we go along. But I love this idea. Others?
I love this. This is something we've been trying to get going for quite some time. And I know we have a couple members. Marta has expressed interest in participating. I'm trying to get the internal Intel team and the Clear Linux folks to get their documents together to share and contribute to something like this. So I think there, at least initially, is a lot of energy from this group around this idea. And I love the details and how you've laid this out, Thomas. This is you and the team should be congratulated. This is very nice so far.
Thomas,
Thank you very much.
Which organization are you coming from? I didn't catch that.
So I work with Ericsson as part of the product security organization within Ericsson, and more specifically, I work in a sort of a security technologies team who do these kind of, let's say, deep dives into different security technologies. So my own background into this, that I did my PhD at Aalto University, where I wrote my dissertation on using hardware-assisted mechanisms for runtime protection. So this is sort of a topic close to my heart, which is, but for this we sort of started from the software side, but I'm looking forward to delving deep or extending this into the hardware-assisted mechanisms now that they are becoming more and more relevant and available.
One of the reasons I ask is I've had some informal conversations in the past with Fedora about extending this. I know some others have talked to Gentoo because they've got some others, but I'm not, it seems to me that taking this and if we can get some others contribute, I think we can very soon come up with material that's better than any one organization's, and this is looks like a fantastic start.
Agreed. Randall, you had your hand up.
Yeah, Thomas, if you wanted to talk to the Gentoo and GCC people, I could get you in touch with those people.
Okay, excellent. Thank you for the offer.
And they're also prepping their document because there's a lot of things on here that have already been like taken care of. Like Fortify Source 2, I think is mostly default now. And I think there's a push to go into Fortify Source 3. So stuff like that.
Yeah, exactly. So as I said, there's definitely like room for additions here, right? So sort of our sort of motivation for why we have picked this is that sort of we have somehow felt that these are the sort of the low-hanging fruit, so to say, and most relevant for our product development units. But obviously, working together, we can extend this further to try to be as comprehensive as possible.
So would we be interested in me setting up some dedicated meeting time to get the interested parties together like we're doing with the source code management guide? Do we want to try to assemble a meeting time for folks to focus in on the compiler options and hardening?
Yeah, I think that would be a good idea. I would propose scope it down a little bit. I mean, I think you've already kind of implicitly done so, but I assume that this is for C and C++, GCC and C Lang primarily. I mean, I think there was a brief attempt to try to broaden it, but the reality was, I think that's the only two that a lot of the documents really focus on, because the others are so different. But with that scope, yes, as long as we clarify what the scope is so people aren't surprised.
Okay. Are there any contrary opinions?
Crow, I'll be in touch with you because I think that there's some important people that should be at that meeting and that we should probably revolve it around them. I will also say that getting GCC and Clang members in the same room sometimes starts fires.
Well, what I'll do is I will get a doodle set up. I'll work with David on the wording so I don't put my giant foot in my giant mouth. And we'll get that sent out. So Thomas, make sure we have your email. I'll add you to that doodle and we'll shoot it out through the mailing list and the Slack for anyone that's interested in participating. So we can pick up Marta and everyone, because she also has a similar artifact.
Yes, excellent. My email address is, I've added it to the Google Doc, so it's available there.
Excellent. So look for that doodle, trying to find a time. Tomorrow, I have a very busy rest of the day. Actual work.
Crow, can I send you the email of someone that needs to be at this meeting that has all the contacts in GCC? And
well, if you weren't marked as spam, you could.
All right.
Yeah, no, go ahead, Randy. Shoot that over to me. I'll make sure they get added to the invite.
Awesome. Thank you.
I jump in real quick. Sorry to be the licensing nerd here, but Thomas, of course, you're always welcome to interact. We would love for you to contribute this, or at least contribute. Just release this as CC BY so we can use it as a starting point. But that is obviously up to you and your organization to make that decision. But we can beg.
We already have internal clearance for the CC BY licensing.
Okay.
So we are still we are waiting for like the final red tape on this particular version. So once we can clear that internally, I would be happy to make this available on GitHub in whatever way is kind of like easiest to work with. Happy to get feedback on that. What would be the most easiest way. But the licensing is already already sort of cleared from our side.
Awesome. Good to
Excellent.
kn- Thank you so much. I'm going to add that to the notes right now because that's
Yeah,
awesome.
and I'll get a folder staged for where we can start to have future collaboration ready. All right, any other questions, comments, or thoughts for Thomas? Again, excellent work. Really appreciate you all putting this together. Very excited about the energy around this particular little project. Thank you also to Stephen for coming and share your research. Hopefully, I look forward to future collaboration with you on the best practices, helping to get maintainers a little more secure or focusing on areas where they have some opportunities for improvement. Thanks, everybody. Appreciate your time and attention today. We will talk to everyone in 2 weeks, if not sooner. Enjoy the rest of your days. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye.